Welcome back to Maine Believers. My name is William, and today we are asking the question, who actually was the historical figure of Jesus Christ? There's a lot of people who believe, I am one of them, that Jesus is God incarnate, but there are a lot of other people who believe that Jesus was a prophet or just a good teacher. So what is the truth? We'll be examining this question from three different angles. First, who did Jesus believe he was? Secondly, who did he behave as though he was? And thirdly, who did his followers believe he was? We'll combine these all together, and hopefully by this end of this video, you have a better understanding of why I believe that Jesus is God. Let's get into it. All right, so let's get started with the question of who did Jesus believe that he was? This is a really important foundational question to ask when we're trying to determine who Jesus was. And that's because if someone doesn't claim to be someone, then we shouldn't assume that they thought they were that person or read that notion into the text. So unless Jesus claimed to be God, we should not believe that he is God. I'm going to be using 3 of the 4 gospel accounts for this first question. And we're first going to be looking at the book of Matthew. Now, Matthew was one of the 12 apostles who followed Jesus over the 3 years of his earthly ministry. And he was a former tax collector who Jesus had redeemed from a life of cheating and embezzling funds into a life of preaching the gospel. And he has a very detailed account in which we find such important moments as the Sermon on the Mount. But in this particular verse, it comes at the end of Matthew, and Jesus is standing trial. This is Matthew 26, 63 through 64. The high priest asks Jesus who he claims to be. And this is Jesus' response. And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent, and the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. Now, at first glance, this might be like, okay, he thought he was the son of a man. Duh, we're all sons of some man. But this title has more significance than just saying you're the son of some man. In fact, it's a very biblically rich title that we first find in Daniel chapter 7. So we're going to flip there to Daniel chapter 7 to try to get a better understanding of what this term son of man actually means. So in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, we read this. And this is Daniel speaking. "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came like one, a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days," that's God, "and he was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed." It's very clear here that this title, Son of Man, is a title for God. Who else has dominion that is everlasting and shall not pass away? Who else has a kingdom that is everlasting and shall not pass away? So when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, it is akin to him saying, "I am the everlasting God." Now, we're going to move on to another gospel entitled the Gospel of Luke. Now, Luke was not a personal apostle of Jesus, but he was a physician and, by today's standards, a very detailed and accurate and respectable historian who was hired by a wealthy client to figure out what actually happened. Who was this Jesus person? And so we are going to be looking at a passage found in Luke 6, 1 through 5. Now, in this passage, the religious leaders of the time are confronting Jesus. They're asking him, "Why are your followers doing this thing on the Sabbath?" His followers are eating food on the Sabbath. They're picking crops on the Sabbath, which you were not allowed to do under Jewish tradition. And so they ask him, "Why do your disciples do this?" And this is his answer. They say, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and he and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priests to eat. And he also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. There's two very interesting things about this passage. The first is that Jesus is teaching the most revered religious scholars of the day about the Bible. He's taking the Old Testament and he's saying, did you not read? Did you not see? Have you not heard when David took the bread of the presence and he ate it and gave it to his followers? And yet it was unlawful for him to do so. So he's confronting the religious leaders of the time, but then he makes a very powerful claim that should make us just stand back and reflect for a minute. He says, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Well, the Sabbath is the day of rest. It's Saturday in the Jewish tradition. We would say it's Sunday as Christians, but it's this day that's supposed to be sacred and set apart for rest. Well, where did we get the Sabbath? Well, the Sabbath originated when God created the entire earth, and on the seventh day, he rested from his work. So God, the God of the universe, is the Lord of the Sabbath. He's the one who originated it. He's the one who commanded the Israelites to follow it. And so it is only he who can determine what should and should not be done on the Sabbath. And yet here is Jesus saying that he, the Son of Man, is the Lord of the Sabbath, and that he can determine what it is okay and not okay to do on the Sabbath, and that the determination or the interpretation of the Old Testament law is only truly found in him. That's an incredible claim, and yet another indicator that Jesus viewed himself as a little more than just a prophet or a good teacher. Now, the final gospel account we're going to be looking at is the book of John. We're going to be looking at John chapter 8, verse 58. Verse 58. And the Jews are asking him who he is and where his authority comes from. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And then in verse 59, so they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. This is my favorite piece of evidence for my belief that Jesus actually believed he was God, that he claimed to be God. This, when people say, why do you believe Jesus is God? Or what's your proof that Jesus actually thought he was God? This is my favorite verse to point to. And it's because it's a really powerful verse that you can't really work your way around. They ask Jesus who he is. Where does his authority come from? And he says, before Abraham was, I am. Well, Abraham lived 2,000 years ago. So obviously, if Jesus was just a man, he was not alive 2,000 years ago, definitely not before Abraham. But if he's God, then it's more than reasonable to believe that he was around before Abraham lived, before Abraham existed. The other interesting thing about this is the title, I am. If I went up to you and I said, before you got here, I am, you'd be like, you're using poor grammar. You would say, I was here, or I came here. But it's not poor grammar. It's actually a divine title that God has only used in the Bible. It's the only other time we see it is in Exodus, when God reveals himself to Moses in the burning bush. And Moses says, who am I to tell the Israelites sent me? And God says to him, tell him, I am sent you. So God uses this as a divine title to describe himself, saying that he's the everlasting, he's the never-changing, never-ending God. And then here's Jesus using it to describe himself and to state his authority and his power over the religious leaders and his ability to speak, to interpret the law, and to heal the sick, and to change what happens on the Sabbath. And so when we combine these three different accounts, we get this very clear image of who Jesus is, or who Jesus believed he was. Jesus clearly speaks as though he was God. He clearly speaks as though he believes himself to have great divine authority. Not that he's some special prophet like Elijah, but that he actually believes himself to be God incarnate. But is that actually the case? Was Jesus actually God incarnate? So I was originally planning to do one main video where I addressed the question, who is Jesus? And we were going to look at this question from three lenses. Who did Jesus claim to be? Who did he behave as though he was? And who did his disciples believe he was? Now, I just finished filming the first part of that, which is who did Jesus claim to be? And that was about 10 minutes in length. And I like to try to keep each of these videos 10 minutes long. So today, Friday, you're going to see this video. This is who did Jesus believe he was? Saturday, you're going to see the second question, which is who did Jesus behave as though he was? And then Monday, I will drop who did Jesus' followers believe he was? So we'll have roughly 10-minute videos over the next 4 days, which is unusual. I don't usually do that, but I want to keep these concise and I want to keep you guys engaged as much as possible. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys Saturday.